Okay, welcome everybody to the 911 Advisory Board meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order and start off with a roll call. Chief Silsby.
Scott Howland in place of Chief Silsby.
Chief Langston. Chief Langston's absent. Chief Spiegel.
Here.
Sheriff Bonner.
Chris Herron here for Sheriff Bonner.
Sheriff Maley.
Here.
Chief Trowerneck.
Here.
Leslie Wilson. Leslie Wilson is absent. Jamie Young.
Here.
Charles Cullen.
Here.
And Charles Burdan.
Here.
Okay, we have a quorum, so we will begin the meeting. And we will begin our meeting with a closed session. We'll now be addressing the closed session pursuant to Government Code Section 11126.18, subsection C, of the detailed information on outages. Do I have a motion for the closed session?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All approve?
Aye.
Okay, we will move into the closed session. This time we don't have to ask everybody to leave. We will go back into the room right behind us. And so we should be back in about 10 to 15 minutes. Okay, I am calling the meeting back to order. Is this mic? It's on, right? Okay. The first order of business, as I call the meeting back to order, is the approval of the February 2014 meeting minutes. Has everybody had a chance to read them? And do you have any changes or corrections to the minutes? Okay, if not, do I have a motion to approve the minutes as written?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion approved for the minutes as written. Our next item on the agenda is our legislative update under unfinished business, which is a conversation with the State 911 Board. Does anyone have anything to bring up on legislative issues? Oh,
I do.
okay.
My favorite subject of late, actually two matters. AB 1717, which this morning is supposed to be taken up right now in appropriations. My understanding is they're going to waive reading, and it'll go to suspense. The author's office has floated some language concepts of amendments to the bill, and that has been distributed to the 911 Coalition, and which is representative of all of the PSAPs, and those are being reviewed. That feedback will go back to the author's office. It should come out of suspense and be heard sometime before the end of the week, which I believe it'll probably be Friday, and that will move the bill along, get it out of the Assembly, and it'll probably go to Senate after that. There are still significant concerns, and I'm speaking here on behalf of Cal Chiefs, not on behalf of the Coalition. The bill still has a negative impact on the Setna Fund. It's still, even with the proposed language of formulas, the baseline that is being proposed to calculate the funding formula is not inclusive of the startup costs and the ongoing costs, and it also has some issues as it relates to going forward, how you're going to calculate what the repayment should be. So we're working on providing feedback to the author, and hopefully that feedback will be accepted in a positive way, and that then they can approach the carriers. To the best of our knowledge, the carriers have not bought off on the proposed amendment, so a lot of this, unfortunately, appears to be legislative gymnastics, and so we're going through a lot of a lot of back and forth, just trying to ensure that the Setna fund's protected. And that's been the focal point from the very beginning, that we ensure that we don't have any further degradation of that fund. And I'll pause there. There's two more bills I just wanted to mention, but if there's other people that have comment on 1717.
And NENA is completely supports the police chief's position on this bill, and we are concerned that, given the fact that 75% of 911 calls now come from cell phones, that the model that the carriers are looking at and creating an entirely new revenue collection mechanism that will take about 10% of the funds just to support the collection mechanism will seriously reduce Setna in the long run. And the recent amendments that have been proposed for this bill create what we think is an artificially low number that they would guarantee to keep Setna whole. They subtract the startup costs and the operating costs right off of the top, and I believe they're creating an artificially low floor underneath the bill that would ultimately be to our detriment in terms of funding 911.
Next bill is Senate Bill 1211. Is Padilla is the next-gen 911 bill, and I'm going to ask our chair to confirm, but my synopsis of the bill is essentially the intent of it was to craft an annual report so that the legislature could get their arms around the magnitude of what next-gen 911 would be, so that we could in the future look towards some funding solutions for next-gen 911. That's my interpretation of what I see.
That's my understanding of the bill.
Okay, and so that has received the support of the police chiefs and I think most of them, if not all of the members of the coalition, and it's moving forward. The last bill was Leno's Bill 962, which was the cell phone kill switch bill. Very, very interesting bill to watch it go through the committees in the legislature. First off was the adamant testimony of the cellular industry that this technology could not be done without horrendous expense to the manufacturers, that it was not a penetratable technology for everyone, and a tremendous amount of resistance to it. The testimony at the hearing, the committee hearing on it was very compelling. We're seeing cities such as Oakland, and I apologize, there was another city where the chiefs came and testified that 70% of their robberies are robberies of people where they're physically having cell phones or tablets taken from them. And so the whole purpose of the kill switch bill that Leno put forward was to dry up the resale market of stolen devices. So if they're killed and even Apple can't reset something that's been killed without the owner initiating the password, then the market goes away. And so again, I think all of the associations that weighed in on that weighed in support. Mr. Leno was very, very pleased with that. And 2 days after that, two of the major manufacturers announced that they were releasing, ahead of the legislation, the ability to do cell phone kill. And I'll just leave that at that. So maybe it wasn't so insurmountable. And for the record, I believe, I know that Apple and there was one other, was it the Android?
Was it track phone or was it no?
One of the other manufacturers already had something similar already in place, but had not weighed in support. And so both of those organizations remove their opposition, and when it did, it seemed to move through the following committees rather speedily. So that's what I have on the ledge issues on my plate.
Were there any other ledge issues anyone want to bring up? Okay, we'll move to the next item, which is Work Group Policy and Practice Changes Report. And that is also for the board. Okay, if we have no comments on that, we will move to the next item, which is reports. The first report up is the California 911 Branch Report with Bill Anderson.
Speakers not on. Technical difficulties, we'll be right with you. Okay, to begin, 3 packets in front of you. The first one is the wireless deployment status, the one we provide at every board meeting. The count rate still remains at 11 PSAPs who are not taking their wireless calls. So, as always, we ask the board and other PSAPs to encourage those PSAPs to start taking wireless calls, and we as a branch to try to make every effort to get them to begin taking their wireless calls. You also have the CETNA Fund Condition Statement. That statement shows actuals for fiscal year 12-13, also shows projections for 13-14 and 14-15. At the last board meeting, I went through the current condition of the CETNA fund, and the numbers are correspond with our branches projecting right now for revenues over the next 2 years. A couple things I did want to bring to your attention. If you look at the revenues from the surcharge, you see they increased from $79,000 to $107,000 projection in 14-15. That's encouraging, but remember, that is based on the recent increase from 0.5 to 0.75 of 1% for the CETNA fund. After 14-15, that amount will start declining again. So it is going to peak at calendar year 14-15. Then it will start declining again, which we expect over the next 2 or 3 years, potentially 4, it will go below the revenues collected due to the CETNA fund. If you notice also the beginning balance, while the CETNA fund is going up due to the revenue change, the beginning balance, which is the carryover from the previous fiscal year, is declining yearly. And that's kind of what's been keeping the CETNA fund in the black over the past few years, is the amount of balance we were able to carry over. That is decreasing, so eventually, as I said, 3 to 4 years out, we're going to be in a situation where we're going to have negative revenues to support the CETNA. So we definitely want to encourage the legislature and governor to move forward with correcting the CETNA. Next handout is titled the State 911 Advisory Board Active Tasks. Please review that. If there's any questions or concerns, contact our advisory board liaison, Paul DeMay, at the 911 or Public Safety Communications Office.
Well, can I ask you something back on the fund statement?
Sure.
In the projected 14-15, since the governor's proposed budget has just come out, are we still looking at the CAL FIRE appropriations in 14-15 as it's currently planned in the budget?
Yes, that is currently within the budget. I see nothing that's going to be removing that from the budget right now.
Well, and this was released with the governor's budget, the fund condition statement.
Right. I'm just,
yeah.
I hadn't seen it in that depth. I just wanted to clarify if it was. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Of the projects the branch has been working on, back in February, we were approved to move forward with the policy and practices changes that were proposed by the working group in the LRPC. The branch began sending out notices to the PSAPs, advising them of the changes and what they can expect. 2 of the scenarios required that the PSAPs could choose between the current funding model, if they were in the process, or the new funding model, which best assisted them financially. To be proactive, the branch calculated calculated out the cost for all the PSAPs for both scenarios and provided to the ones that fit in that so they can make a more informed decision. We've held webinars in April and May to go over the changes, which were very, very well received. I believe approximately 60 plus PSAPs attended the webinars, and I think we have one more coming up in June to go over the policy and practices changes. As a branch, myself, our business manager, Monica McGrath, have made multiple visits to various PSAP managers meetings throughout California to talk to them and be able to exchange ideas on an impact of the policy and practices changes, and we continue to do that. We have established and made available the various timelines that the PSAPs must adhere to get funding should they request it through one of the various scenarios. I'm pleased to say that through all the communications we've had with the PSAPs and with the webinars, we've seen no negative response on the practices. So I commend the work group and our branch on an excellent effort and putting those policy and practice changes forward. It's gone over very well. Text to 911. Very big topic right now. As of May 15th, the carriers made it available to the PSAPs. The PSAPs had the ability to request text to 911 from the carriers, and the carriers at that time, once requested, have 6 months to implement text to the PSAP. We were doing testing between November 2013 and March 2014 of the various types of applications the carriers could do. That is SMS to TTY, which emulates the current TTY application that most PSAPs have, a web-based application that is provided by the carrier, and then the integrated solution. The integrated solution requires a full IP network from the point of connection at the carrier down to the PSAP. There's a minimal number of PSAPs, only those located in Butte County have that capability right now. So majority of the PSAPs in California are going to be stuck with either requesting TTY or the web-based application should they choose to do that. We did complete and post our final report on text to 911 on April 23rd. It is on our website at this point in time. And when we wrote the report, we want to be very careful that we try to stay non-judgmental of any one of the applications. We just wanted to take a look at the application, look at how it worked at the PSAP, and what the PSAP call taker could expect to see when they're utilizing these various applications. And it's really to give the PSAP a chance to review how it's going to impact their operational procedures at the PSAP. We didn't want to make a determination of what's the best one for them. They have to make that decision on what's going to best fit the PSAP operations. And I think we did a very good job in doing that. We have conducted webinars on text to 911, which again were very well received, like the policy and practice changes. Some of the main observations we saw with text to 911: call setup times and durations of a text call are going to take longer than a voice call. Average call setup time was 20 to 30 seconds from the time we hit send on our cell phone till the time that text was received at the call taker's position. So, and that varied somewhat on the application, but it ran in the 20 to 30 second range. Durations are going to take longer. A lot of that is going to be based on the ability of the person sending the text and how well they can text. If they're very poor, if they use abbreviations, if they misspell a lot of words, it's going to require a lot of back and forth communications between the call taker and the individual sending the text to make sure they get the proper information for the call taker to send out the correct emergency response personnel. There's currently no language translation for text, and I want to make the distinction. We do have a contract in place for language interpretation, which is the verbal communication that we can interpret. California has to interpret over 90 languages at any given time. We can do that verbally. For text, for translation, which is understanding the written word and putting that back out again, we do not have anything in place right now to do that. We did an RFI in April to the various language providers. We got one response back, and their plan is to have something in place by early 2015, first, second quarter. So we're still a ways out before we have a solution for language translation. Location-based accuracy is not the same as voice calls. Right now, we can receive calls, not most of them, unfortunately, in phase 2. Right now, with text, they locate you by the centroid of the cell sector that person calls in. It is routed to the PSAPs, whose operational area that cell sector lies within. So it's a very broad range of accuracy where that person calls in from. So it's important, whoever sends a text message to a call taker, that they know their location, because the call taker is probably going to have very low chances of locating that person if they don't have it. We are seeing some cases where accuracy has improved with some of the carriers, but it's not consistent across the board and not something I would take as extremely positive. Transfers are limited based on the application. With the TTY application, you can transfer through the selective router. One of the problems we did find is when you do the transfer, you lose the history. It takes the message forward and pushes it to the next PSAP. You lose the historical information. With the web-based application, you can transfer the whole message, history, and ongoing. The problem is transferability in web-based application is a little bit different than the TTY application. You actually have the person has to move from one centroid to another centroid for them to pick up the transfer. We will be working with the various TCCs that are supplying that information to see if we can increase that for the PSAPs.
Bill?
Yes.
I'm hopeful that as we move forward with this, that I can appreciate that we'll work with them and ask them to, but I think that for a whole host of reasons, from liability, from review, from accountability, everything, it's going to have to be part of a standard. I don't think it's going to be acceptable for somebody to suggest that it's an option. We'd like you to be able to make that functionality capable. Mm-hmm. We have to have the ability to go back and review what was done for training purposes, for everything, mm-hmm. so that people, we can learn from what happens. If we lose that and it falls off somewhere else or is not available, then we're not going to be able to do our jobs the way we need to, and we can't progress the skill set as we move into next gen 911, particularly as it applies to the SMS or text messaging.
No, we understand that. Part of the problem is it's not a mandated requirement with text. So as we're working with carriers, not only with the carriers, but the service providers, trying to get them to improve the product that's going out to the PSAP, that's going to take some time. Part of it, we're still learning about text. We did the initial pilot projects, and we learned a lot. In the past few months, we learned a lot from the various TCCs on how the network or the carrier is actually going to provide the connection down to the PSAP. We expect as PSAP start to roll out, and there are some that are looking at doing it, that our branch is working with closely. We'll learn more information that we can push out. We can also find shortfalls within the system that we don't see, that we can go back to the various service providers and work with them to get those issues corrected.
Well, and I want to make one comment here. We're working with a technology that was never set up for emergency communications. And so a text message was never developed for this. So without it being developed in the beginning for this type of an application, it's hard to expect the same results as if it was developed for an emergency communication application. However, we're finding that our carriers are working proactively with us.
Yeah, we've had
no one's, coming back and say we won't do it. So they are working very proactive with us to help solve the problems.
Yeah, we've had very good response and very good meetings with the various service providers and carriers. So we're encouraged there. But again, it is looked at as an interim solution. This is not a permanent fix. It's just really to get us over that hurdle till we get next gen out, and then these applications go away. Right now, when you look at the two. Go ahead.
I want to clarify my comment. I wasn't referring to the interim solution. I'm referring to the spec for next gen. Mm-hmm. That's why I was caught a little back when you said, there's not a requirement. If in fact we're going to set the specifications of what will be reimbursed in California, then that very much should be part of that spec in next gen that says you're going to be able to, to transfer that conversation over, and it moves with the call. And going to have to work it out, going to have to come up with the technology.
Oh, I agree. And I think the technology, with the next-gen technology, from what we've seen, we do expect that to be quite capable with the next-gen deployment. And then as part of the process, our branch is currently working on, as I've mentioned before, we're currently working on developing our RFP to go out to bring a consultant in to help us with the transition plan, which will establish a lot of specifications for California, and text would be included in that. So, yeah, the expectation is next-gen will solve a lot of those issues. But there are going to be some shortfalls and issues we'll have to deal with over the next few years till we push next-gen out.
And Bill, I think we all realize this is the first generation of an interim solution, but the state has consistently said that they support the I3 standard when we get there and when we have the broadband network that we're building out. And I think the one thing that concerned me a little bit is that the web portal does not interface with ECATS. Is that correct? So we're not really capturing that data right now. Is there
that is correct.
Yes. Is there an effort to work with the carriers to provide an interface that we can capture that data?
It's actually the TCC, or the Text Control Center. The way the system actually works is when the text call is placed to the carrier, it's fed through the normal route and it's sent to a Text Control Center. The Text Control Center acts as a triage point. It makes a determination of what PSAP has requested, what type of text. It does the conversion and provides that solution out to the PSAP, whether it's through a TTY, through the selective router, whether it's web-based over an internet connection, or it's through an IP connectivity from the TCC out to the PSAP. So right now with the web-based application, we're working with the TCCs to get reports from them, because it is all stored at the TCC. If it's the TTY application, some of the CPE equipment does record it in ECATS, some of it doesn't. So there's variances between the CPE providers also in what we can get and what we can't get. So,
because certainly once we start, the PSAP start taking text to 911, there'll be issues of evidence in court, or it'll be critical to have that data and the correct timestamps and everything else on the.
Right, yeah. I mean, between the two applications that we've looked at, from, I would say, probably ease of use for the call taker, the web-based application really is more fluid in what it does. The shortcoming tends to be right now with the transferability. Not that you can't do it, it just takes a little bit more to get that done. That's something we will be working with the TCCs, but from ease of use, be able to transfer, pick up calls, the web-based application seems to be a little bit more user-friendly in that respect. A little more cumbersome on the TTY side.
Thank you.
Welcome. We also recently conducted a survey of PSAPs, just trying to see how ready PSAPs were. We sent it out to 454 PSAPs. We had a response of 126, which is 27.8% of the PSAPs. Out of that, 8.7% or 11 said yes, they were planning on taking text to 911. 11.8% or 15 potentially are going to take it, still thinking about it. 30.7% or 39 are considering taking it, again not sure, and then 61%, 48.8%, 61 are not considering it right now. So it's tending more, I think, or they're being a little more conservative. They may be looking to see how other rollouts go or what the issues are. As we work with the PSAPs on pushing text to 911 out, one of the things we're going to be doing is collecting data and information that we can present out to the PSAPs to assist them even more in making a decision. We want to capture real-time information on how text actually works in California and how various PSAPs have dealt with some of the shortcomings that may come up from the various applications they utilize. So that's kind of where we're at with text right now. We're also working on the 911 Education Awareness Program. We've talked about that over the past couple of meetings. Again, the goals of the Education Awareness Program are to educate the public on the proper use of 911 and reduce non-emergency calls made to PSAPs. We've been working on this for about 7-8 months now. During that time, we've completed 2 surveys. The first was our initial survey back in November of 2014. It was a survey out to PSAPs and consumers, really just to see how they look, how they view the consumers of 911 and how the PSAPs deal with 911 right now and how they market that out to the public. We did a second survey that's currently finishing off right now, which is consumer survey only, going much more in depth on the trends and how the public utilizes 911, when they call 911, what they consider 911 for. We've done 4 focus groups, or a total of 8 in 4 locations. 6 of them were English, 2 were in Spanish, and our consultant, Olga Media, developed some creative concepts on marketing 911. So the point of the focus groups was to present the creative, as they refer to it, billboard, ads that go on the side of a bus terminal, radio spots, just to get their impact or their impression of how these affect them when they take a look at it or listen to it, so we can move forward when we're dealing with the pilot projects. We have the 5 PSAPs that are going to work in our pilot project finalized now. That's Elk Grove Police Department, Calavera Sheriff's Office, Anaheim PD, Cal Poly SLO Police Department, and Chascom. So we thank them for their participation in this project. The pilot program should be starting shortly in June, approximately a 5-month duration. And out of that will hopefully come a program from our branch to help sustain and help PSAPs market 911 out to the public in the future. Of our pilot projects, we still have 3 remaining. Mendocino and Pasadena Ring projects are both.
Bill,
Yes.
excuse me, just a question.
Just, is there a text to 911 component to the public education?
There will
piece?
be, yeah,
Okay.
there will be.
Thanks.
Of the 3 remaining pilot projects, Mendocino and Pasadena Ring projects, both of these are full ESINet projects. These are ones where we'll be able to see how, because it will be using an ESINet down through complete IP. So this is one area we'll be able to see how text to 911 acts over an ESINet. They're currently doing some software confirmations through AT&T Labs. The networks are currently being tested right now. So hopefully at the end of the summer, we'll start seeing that pushing out to the PSAPs in the Pasadena and Mendocino areas. The Ventura hosted project is another project to look at how we can route on location-based routing. Everybody's been briefed on the Northeast Grant project. It's been in place for a while and has been successful on routing on location. We're doing this now with a different carrier to see if they can duplicate what Verizon was able to do. They're currently testing the network right now for its ability to transfer calls, and we should start seeing calls routed beginning in September. So that will give us in addition some more information on location-based routing, which is a component of NextGen when that is pushed out. Member Spiegel already went over the two legislative bills that we've been tracking closely, of course, AB 1717 and SB 1211. Obviously, the setting a fund component is critical that we all are watching. Another portion of that bill is the branch's responsibility for reporting and recommending the surcharge fund every year, which we currently do anyway. Before we set the fund rate, we do all the calculations. Right now, we just don't post it, and that was one of the components that they're going to request us to post. The SB 1211, that's currently an appropriation suspense file as of May 12th. 2 components there. One is for us to develop timeline and plans for NextGen 911. We are currently working on that as it is. We're already moving forward and taking a look where NextGen is going to be, developing plans. We've been working with carriers and service providers over the past few months to really start understanding. So we have what NextGen is, what they can provide as far as NextGen. So as we move out and develop our RFP and start working with the consultant and work groups that are going to provide information, we have a very good, clear direction where California needs to be with NextGen. So that concludes my update. So if there's any additional questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
No? Green one. Thank you. Is there a process that you've mapped out for how you're developing the RFP? For the working on the requirements that would go into the RFP for the timeline that the consultant would be working on?
I'm not sure if I'm following.
So you're developing an RFP for a consultant, right?
Correct.
And so is there any input to what that person's going to be doing in their product, what they're what are the requirements that person is going to be doing?
Oh, as far as within the
Yeah.
RFP itself, right now it's being developed within the office. One of the things I will be doing, I will be attending the National Association of State 911 Administrators conference in June, and I'm going to take that opportunity to work with various other states that have done next-gen rollouts, that have used the services of a consultant to get information from them also that we can incorporate in our development of RFP, to, so we can find out what's worked, what didn't, and stuff like that.
In that, one of the questions that I have about, I guess, the carriers and the investment with the location accuracy, specifically for text. If the interim solutions are, going to be replaced in somewhere to 3 to 5 years, I got to suspect that there's not a lot of investment that they want to put into the interim solutions, that most of it's going to go to the more permanent solution. So is there any discussions at the coordinators level, your nationwide association, or any other discussion or forums about what's going to happen with any kind of improved accuracy in the interim in the next 3 to 5 years, or is this what we're living with in that there's no improvements in the horizon?
That's the million-dollar question, is what the carriers are willing to do to improve accuracy right now. Verizon does have an application you can use, which is called Location Agent. You can download it onto your phone. We tried using it during our test. We could not download it onto our phones. We actually had to have Verizon bring us out a phone with the application loaded. It was fairly successful as far as rebidding and getting accuracy. T-Mobile supposedly can provide better accuracy. So it's starting to come forward, but it's pure speculation. But as far as carriers putting a huge investment into it, I probably wouldn't lean that way.
Well, and I want to make a comment to this. This is pure speculation. It's really up to the FCC to be driving the carriers through their regulations to provide accuracy improvements. So while we'll work closely with our carriers, we can't really affect them to do one thing or other. It has to be through the FCC.
Okay, thank you.
Bill, I have one more request. Your presentations are always very informative, and they come at us fast and furious. And as a member of the board, I have two requests. One is I'd very much like to receive our packet more than a couple days before the meeting, so that we have an opportunity to digest the information. But the second thing would be, at the very least, for your reports, can we at least get an outline with some bullets as to what you're going to be speaking to?
Oh, yeah.
Because it's just coming at us like this. And
I can slow down also if you need me to. I tend to talk fast.
I don't have a problem with your pace of presentation. It's just, it's a lot of information coming, and it would be easier for us to make added notes to an outline for better absorption and sharing with our constituents.
Yeah, I put those together far enough in advance. I can provide them to Paul so he can give you an outline of what my presentation is going to be.
Thank you very much.
We can do that.
And we're continually trying to improve to get the packets out to the board sooner. So we will continue to commit to do that. Our goal is to get them out, well prior to the 10-day timeline. So we'll continue to improve on that.
Okay, thank you.
Back over here. Next report, Long Range Planning Committee.
Thank you. The LRPC met just one time since our last advisory board meeting. That was yesterday. But we do have quite a few items to report on. The good thing is that we do have minutes that will be produced. I don't have them today, but I know Paul and his crew will be working on those, and those will be available to everyone. But a quick summary for you. The WARN Act is still on our agenda. The LRPC has actually provided a document with some recommended edits on the WARN Act to the state, and we discussed it yesterday. We're working closely with Bill on that and anticipate some feedback from him and his team in mid-July for the LRPC to discuss at our summer meetings. Just to wrap up.
Just so you know, I mean, we're getting a lot of, and when I say we, I can say the police chiefs have received a couple requests from from the legislature as to knowing what the recommendations are of the users for amendments to the Warren Act, to move things forward. And I appreciate and suggested that the request would appropriately come through the 911 office if it was something that is being recommended by the advisory committee. But my report back was that has not come up from LRPC to the advisory committee for review yet. That said, we need to get off the dime on this and come together with some recommendations sooner than later. I mean, we're obviously going to be too late to do anything with it for this legislative session, but we should be looking at something for July that we can at least have conversation about, so that as we come out of the chute, starting after the summer break with new proposed legislation, that we can start at least putting a better picture in front of the legislature of what the needs are to be able to accomplish some of the shortfalls, projected shortfalls, with or without at this time Next Gen 911.
Would it help if we possibly distributed the draft with the track changes that we have right now to the full board,
I think
at least to see the direction
I
that the
think
LRPC is going?
I think there's pros and cons to that. I think first off, the cons are is that the office has not had the opportunity to weigh in on those yet and implications of those. And the second thing is, at least my experience is, anytime a draft goes out of something, particularly if we're looking at making that a public document, that the versions and iterations of those become difficult to land on what the final recommendation is. So I appreciate the speed of that, but I think to stick with a process that runs it through and gets the appropriate feedback from the office and then brings it to the board in a structured manner is probably the best route to go.
And I have a different recommendation. Whether this will work or not, I don't know, because it would have to go back through the associations, is revising the Warren Act and sending it out for comments is a daunting task. Identifying the issues in the Warren Act that we think that people might want to weigh in on, and identifying and bulleted and send those issues out to the associations and get feedback on specific issues, and then let the LRPC go back and craft what that would look like. Because I know that there'll be a lot of interest when we do start revising the Warren Act, and the LRPC has done an amazing job, but I can't imagine the number of comments that would come in that would try to be reconciled. So it's almost like a Survey Monkey type of an issue that we could send out where the comments are, kind of start focusing what we need to be looking at. That would be my recommendation. I just have had to look at, through my experience and my position, a number of changes on a number of drafts, and it gets very daunting when you're looking at so many. Just a different comment.
I think it's an efficient way of doing it. Probably the point or the goal here is we need to get her done. We got to move that along and get that. LRPC's had it for a while. I believe, if I'm understanding our forum, it's a number 2 priority, and in the scheme of things, with looking at the fund trending down, and that I think that the priority of this needs to be, for all of us, not just LRPC, needs to be a number 1 priority, because we've got to have the information available and be ready to go, so that when the legislature and or the governor decides to take the step to move this forward and do it, that we've done our homework, and they're not waiting on our response for what needs to be done.
Sure, thank you. And so just a couple of comments. I think the LRPC, we completed our recommended edits at some point last year. I don't remember at what meeting that was, but it's definitely taken a back seat as the state and I think us and the work group have worked on the 911 policy changes. So that's why we brought it back up yesterday at the meeting. So I'll certainly follow up with Bill, and we'll kind of develop a plan for how we're going to move forward on this, but understanding that it is a priority of the group. Just to wrap up the annual training allotment, we spoke about this at the last meeting, but wanted to make sure that everyone knew language will be added to the TD 290 form. So when PSAP reps are submitting for reimbursement for ATA for attending a conference, there'll be some additional language there that they have to acknowledge that they participated in the conference. And then also the associations will be asked to add some language to their registration process if they want their conference to have or be eligible for ATA reimbursement. We've also added text to 911 to our agenda just so we have the ability to talk about that at future meetings. The CCTF, I know Tracy's here and is going to give a report on that, but just wanted to follow up with you because I know this was an item we discussed as well. We continue to work with the CCTF on establishing the list of duties, responsibilities, expectations for county coordinators. I think Tracy will touch on that a little bit about some of the work they've done, and we'll continue to work with them here this summer on that process. And then finally, a couple items for you. This is regarding the 911 policy work group. Maybe we'll just call it the work group now. If that continues, the LRPC would like to request that the advisory board continue the work group. If you recall, the original intent was just to focus on the 911 policy changes that were proposed last year. So with that work wrapping up, we do see some good potential to use that group. It's a group that worked very well together. Chuck Burdan was our chair, and so we would like the blessing of the board to continue to have that group stay intact. Just some potential items, potentially the Warren Act, strategic plan, roadmap review, ops manual review, which, as Bill said, they're going to be publishing the latest version at the end of this month, and then also to weigh in on next-gen development. So I think there's a good opportunity to use that group, and we'd like to continue to have it be in existence. And Paul, you need a motion on that, or Chair?
I'm not sure that we need a motion on that. I think that we can all agree that this just continues as the work group items that you've been working on. What we would be voting on is the information that you would be bringing back as a result. Okay.
Sounds good. And then just one other thing, the work group members have been participating in the town hall meetings that Bill mentioned. We do have, or there was one vacancy on the work group, and that was created by Danita Kronbach's retirement. As you recall, she was from Ventura County representing large PSAPs. So the work group looked at that. There was a desire to keep the rep from Southern California representing either a large or extra large PSAP. We solicited nominations that went to our chairperson, Chuck Burdan. Now we had some discussion about the nominees via conference call, and the work group recommends and the LRPC supports appointing Cynthia Freeman from San Bernardino County Sheriff's Office to the work group. And again, so that's either informational or whether, I don't know whether you, Madam Chair, sorry, unclear on my end, whether we need a motion or that's just informational for the board.
I believe it's informational for the board
Sounds
unless
good.
the board has some concern with the LRPC going through their process to bring members.
And did want to comment with, we do want to circle back and check in with each of the work group members to make sure that they want to continue to stay. So kind of give them an opportunity to recommit, anticipating a multi-year commitment because of the items that we foresee them working on. And again, since the original intent was just the policy work group. So we'll get that recommitment from them, work through any vacancies that are created as a result of that, and keep them working. And that's all I have.
And I just have one comment, and I can't express enough gratitude towards the LRPC and what they've done, the amount of work that they've done, and providing information for all the board members. So I want to thank everybody that is on the LRPC, and then also thank the folks that set in on the webinars, town hall webinars that we've been having. I think it's really a big benefit for the PSAPs to know that the LRPC are participating in those workshops as a collaborative process as well. So thank you. And now our next, if there's no more comments, our next item is the County Coordinator Task Force. Nancy Vaughn.
Actually, be Tracy Kessler.
I was going to say, that's not Nancy.
Hi, and Nancy Vaughn has retired, so she is no longer a member. And also Cindy Copulus is, had a promotion, so she's no longer a county coordinator or a member of the CCTF. So we do have the 2 openings, and we are soliciting replacements right now. We hope to have those in by the end of 2014. So that's my first update. The second one is that we have completed the review and made necessary updates to the County Coordinator Resource Manual. The manual is now posted on the website and can be seen there. Due to technology issues, it is a living document, so it needs to be updated regularly, and we will be watching that and doing that. The CCTF continues to participate as a member of the LRPC work group, and also we provide support and advice to the California 911 Education and Awareness Project. To meet our commitment that we made to the last advisory board meeting, we have developed, distributed, and collected the first ever California County Coordinator Survey, and we're happy to announce that we had a 93% return rate on the survey. We're in the process right now of assessing a wide range of responses and intend to use that as a baseline to address county coordinator issues and concerns. Our next county coordinator forum will be on June 25th at the California State 911 office. The agenda items are driven by the survey results and some of the concerns that we have seen in looking at the survey, which we're still going over. We will only have one forum this year, County Coordinator Forum, so we can get back on track at having our second one in conjunction with NENA. So our first NENA event in 2015, we'll have the CC Forum the day after that in 2015. And I think that is all of my updates, unless you have questions.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
And then the next item on the agenda is a presentation. And we have a presentation from Michael Boyden, who is from SAIC. SAIC is our new contractor to help us start the outreach for FirstNet and help us start planning for our working with FirstNet on developing California's public safety broadband needs. 2 of our members, board members here are on the CalFriend, which is the California First Responder Network board. And so what we want to do, and I don't know that we'll do this every meeting unless you guys would like it done every meeting, is to continue to have presentations on where we're at with FirstNet. There is a growing acknowledgement, which I'm very, very pleased at, that we can't move forward with FirstNet unless we're looking at next generation 911 as well, because the calls and the information comes in to the PSAPs before it would be heading out to the first responders. So there is definitely a nexus with these 2 networks and very huge programs that we're going forward with. So we want to make sure the board members know what's happening on the FirstNet side for California as well. With that, Michael.
Terrific. Real pleased to meet with the board this morning. Again, as Karen mentioned, my name is Mike Boyden. I'm with Science Applications International, SAIC, and the topic this morning is to give you an update on California's activities under NTIA's State and Local Implementation Grant Program, which is supporting the National Public Safety Broadband Network. To do that, what I thought I'd do is do a quick recap on the network itself, should be old news to folks, but then give you an update with respect to California's status on governance and outreach, and then bump it up a level and talk about the federal level process and next steps that are happening starting this summer. So first, with respect to the network, as you know, 2 years ago, law was established founding the First Responder Network Authority, or FirstNet. Their vision is to provide emergency responders with the first nationwide high-speed wireless broadband network dedicated to public safety. And the Act provided $7 billion that's going to be acquired through the next 10 years over the spectrum auctions, as well as 20 megahertz of wireless spectrum in the 700 megahertz bandwidth. And as the FirstNet board member, Chief Jeff Johnson likes to say, this is the linebacker of spectrum. And that's due to the penetration and propagation characteristics. In fact, I just saw something in the press last week. FCC Chairman Wheeler had mentioned that, oops, it looks like I lost a screen. That's okay, that the carriers that don't have 700 megahertz spectrum right now are going to get first dibs at the adjacent 600 megahertz spectrum in the next auction. And the reason he said that was so that it would increase their likelihood of connecting 911 calls while in building. So that's just how valuable and important that lower range spectrum is. If you look at that quad chart, and this is from FirstNet, for 911, however, we're talking this high-speed broadband network, which is kind of described in the top left red quadrant. But what it's really about for 911 is the yellow top right and the blue bottom left. What it is applications and services. It's just a network. It's just a high-speed data pipe. And what really brings the value to it is the applications and the services. So for the folks here in this room, you're very, very familiar with the data of CGIS and CAD data, LETs, things like that. This is going to be an opportunity to bring that sort of information closer to the field person that's actually out there making things happen, as well as on the services side, bringing the data storage from the data, like they note here, records management, data storages for audio, things like that. Again, bringing that closer to where the action's happening for first responders. If you look at the network, starting from the bottom up, again, this is a data service. So what you see at the bottom there for devices that a first responder would use are laptops and air cards. These are things that are going to communicate applications to folks. You want me to pause for a second? Are people? Yeah, let's go ahead and.
Yeah, just give us a minute here.
Some of these slides are a little detailed. And
We got that fixed, okay.
you can always turn around. I got a great view of them over here. Are we good? Okay. So yeah, looking at that block network diagram from the bottom up, you've got the devices. They communicate over the wireless radio access network through backhaul to the network core. Now, if you look at that diagram up to the top right, though, this is what happens, is the network core connects interfaces to other networks, and as you see, 911 centers are that interconnection. So that's the way you're going to see this network connected to 911. Let's now talk about status with respect to California and governance and outreach. The law requires that each state create a single point of contact for interacting with FirstNet, a SPOC, as well as a governance structure. For California, SPOC is Karen Wong, and the governance structure is the California First Responder Network Board. As I think Karen mentioned, there's a great overlap between, and we'll talk a little more about that, with respect to members in the 911 Advisory Board, as well as CalFern, which is how it's being referred to. And so that's really important because the net of this is that this whole structure is intended to communicate, provide a voice for public safety community here in California to get their needs up to FirstNet and get that into the design for the network that they'll be using in the future. As I mentioned, CalFern's got you wired in right there in the board members themselves, but also there's a set of advisory committees that have been set up. This is one of them. And to me, this provides the arms and the legs, the operational aspects that the board will need when it starts working at policy and decision making. This structure is still being expanded, but you can see on this slide some of the committees that have been established right now. The SLIC-P grant, State and Local Implementation Grant Program, they call it SLIC-P, has two phases. Phase one is focused on outreach, and that's what we're going through right now. It's actually in the grant funding requirements to provide education outreach, just what is this public safety broadband network, what is FirstNet, and get that message out to the local public safety first responders. Phase two is then, given that awareness, data collection. So we'll then move into a data collection, and hopefully these folks now are aware of what the network is and what it can do for them, and then we'll be able to provide their needs to help with the design. With respect to California, a lot of activity has happened here in the first quarter. With the grant funding, The OES has actually hired 3 analysts that are working as a core team right there at the office. They hired public safety broadband consultant, that's SCIC, talk a little more about that, that's why I'm here. And we held a team kickoff and planning workshop at the end of last month. We've already began, and I actually have a good set of progress on section drafts for an outreach and an education plan, and we're using that as our template as we schedule out the outreach in the coming months. One other thing I wanted to mention too was that the Office of Emergency Communications in the Department of Homeland Security offers a coverage workshop, and so we're scheduling that for the summer as well. If you're not familiar with SCIC, Science Applications International has been doing public safety telecommunication support for California and other states for over a decade, mostly through that Office of Emergency Communications Technical Assistance Program. So they've been involved with exercises, with helping with the interoperability plans, things like that for the state. In the last few years, we've been doing public safety broadband planning. For example, myself, I've been doing a lot of work in Oregon, not only in the technical planning, but in this last year, we actually got grant funds different from the ones we're using here to do an advanced outreach program for FirstNet. And so we've already covered over 5,000 miles of in-person presentation, workshops, webinars, developed informational flyers that have been distributed, developed websites and things like that. We're now planning to do the same and are well on our way here in California as well. Our team for California includes folks that are multidisciplinary as well as multi-geographical. So Greg Hamilton's our project manager here in Sacramento. I'm in the East Bay. I have a commercial telecommunications background. For example, Patrick Kempker's in Southern California. He's got a land mobile radio background and so forth. We have folks that will be helping on the team that have LTE engineering experience. We have the ability to reach back for financial, even outreach specialists themselves. So everything that we need to make this successful. I want to bring this now up to the federal level here and talk about what happens next overall for FirstNet and the public safety network. At the highest level, what you got going right now is on the 30th of April, last month, they issued their initial consultation package for what they're calling the initial consultation. This is going to be a meeting with folks in the governor's office and some major stakeholders that will begin the process. And this law actually has in it that thou shalt consult with the states when you build this network, FirstNet. And so this is part of that, and obviously a very important part.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to make an added piece here that Michael doesn't know. We had our initial conference call to start talking about how we're going to do this consultation phase with FirstNet. And what they've agreed to is to have 3 meetings in California instead of just the one that they're having with every other state because of our size and complexity. So I was extremely pleased about that. So we should be able to do a very good outreach program. With one meeting, it was going to be extremely difficult.
That is a coup, by the way, because I know other states, for example, we were just on the phone with Dave Buchanan on FirstNet last week with a consultation call for Oregon, and his thing was, well, we can maybe do it in a day, but if there's a bigger state, we'll go a day and a half on one presentation. Doing 3 shows that you're getting the attention that is really required for a state like California. But going down the 3 steps there, this is all, again, to encourage and solicit the requirements that go into the RAN design, the radio access network design for the state. There'll be iterative meetings to interact on that design, a kind of iterative process. And then finally, the end result of this all is for that final state plan that'll be presented to the governor, and they'll have the opportunity to opt in or opt out of that plan for California. Over the last 6 months, this is an eye chart, and about 200 pages of process, FirstNet has developed a consultation process that gets you from the far right, which is where we are now, to that plan, that red square on the left, or on the right of the diagram there, with a lot of stuff in between. But I just wanted to put this up here to let you know that it is a 45-step process, and we're going to be going through each one of those. But as we move down the path, but just the major sections of that include things like getting the user requirements in. That blue square on the far left, that's that consultation workshop we were just talking about. The gray box just above the initial consultation is the checklist. There's a readiness checklist before you have your consultation that you have to get in. We helped Oregon put theirs in about a week ago Monday, and that was the first one in the nation. So there were like 20 documents. It takes a little bit even to get started into the process. On our side, as the SLIC P outreach process starts, this summer we'll at the same time be starting town halls. We're trying to leverage best practice, and there was really a lot of successful feedback received with respect to the Next Gen 911 outreach program. So we're using the same format. We're going to have experts come in that can talk about FirstNet. We'll have the local perspectives brought in. We'll be doing it live telecasts over the internet as well as in-person opportunities for attendance. And then if you can't do either of those, there'll be the videotaping and storage on the website so that you can access the information. These will begin in the summer, and you'll be seeing more information about them as they roll out. One last item I wanted to mention that's happening near term here in the summer is that Office of Emergency Communications coverage workshop. The reason I want to mention this now is it's sort of a forerunner of what you'll see in that phase 2 data collection and the iterative design aspects to FirstNet. What they're going to do is OEC will come in, and if you look at that map, they'll come in with, it's not a clean slate, but with their best guess with the knowledge they have of where you would need coverage. This is dependent on where some of the corridors are that currently provide coverage, where people are living, things like that. So they'll do that, and this is going to be divided out for in-building, handhelds, vehicular, and then there's like everything else. When you get out to the rural things, they're looking at a 3-in-1 architecture that includes like satellites or deployable, cell on wheels to cover it. Then the fun begins. This is where you get involved, because on the next slide here, you then tell them, well, you've missed this and this and this other thing. And that'll be, identifying what agencies need to have this sort of coverage, what facilities that support those agencies, and the public safety needs of the community at hand. And as you can see, PSAPs are on that list. This is just an example one. But it also includes things like hospitals and schools, prisons. And then finally, critical infrastructure. There's going to be things like nuclear power plants and dams that are going to need to have coverage for this broadband network. And one thing we found is there's areas that only you're going to know because you know how you operate in protecting the state. For example, there's one case, again, this one was up in Oregon, that they had a prison and they had a courthouse. Those were clearly defined by OEC. These are important infrastructures. But what was missing is there's this route that always gets traversed as you bring the prisoners to the courthouse and back, and obviously you wouldn't want to have your service for your officers and then all of a sudden go into a black zone with a prisoner before you come back up on the prison site. So that's something that you'd want to map out and include on this coverage diagram. So it'll be real. It's not going to just happen once, so you don't have to worry about missing out, but it's something that more we prepare up front, the better the output's going to be. Okay, just to kind of wrap up, kind of thinking ahead to that. Thought questions to kind of have in mind and jot on the sides of your notes for going forward into this process. One thing is to think about how this can benefit your stakeholders in 911, in law enforcement, fire, emergency medical, in terms of what uses you might have for this broadband capability. As you know, if you're building a software program or something like that, you start out with a use case, and that drives, those needs drive the development, the design. We want to do the same thing here. Figure out what are we going to use it for, but first we obviously have to know what the thing can offer. The other piece is what I just mentioned, making sure that you have identified and close at hand when they ask, what are your major agencies, facilities, infrastructure that you want to make sure that there's coverage at high-speed broadband wireless ranges. And then the final one is particularly for the rural areas. FirstNet's going to be soliciting for assets that can actually do two things. One, help them cover the areas at lower cost, and also potentially end up with a lower cost to California for the service. And so where they're at is they're kind of looking at things that maybe a major service provider doesn't already have. So if there's a municipal fiber network for backhaul out in a less connected area, or there's a data center that's tier 5 that can withstand all the earthquakes and that sort of thing that you need and get redundant power. Those are the sort of assets they're going to look forward to asking you to receive, and we'll get more information about that coming forward. They're going to be working on that list. Just want to leave this one with you. If you have an opportunity to talk about the Public Safety Broadband Network and FirstNet and this LTE technology that's being, fourth generation technology that's being used, just remind folks this is not a replacement for their two-way radios. This is not a replacement for LMR, and particularly this is something that comes up for the folks that are the bean counters and the folks responsible for budget. No, it's not like if you're asked, well, do I have to buy that upgrade for the land mobile radio system? Oh, yeah, you do. You still need the mission critical voice. What this is, though, is a complementary technology. You're going to be able to do so much more, as you're sort of seeing as text to 911 is starting to work into the 911 voice system, and soon it's going to be more than just text as you get to next gen. Same thing here. And so data will become more and more important as we go on. That's all I've got. Looking forward to another opportunity as we go along to update you, but that's where we're at this point, and open to any questions you might have.
I just have a comment. To all the board members, we will be reaching out to all the board members. We're going to be reaching out to all the associations to be sure that you're talking with your groups, because this system is really for the first responder. And so as we plan what we're going to do, by the time that handheld device gets in the hand of the first responder, it's got to do what the first responder needs. And so we really need to be doing the outreach. We need to be looking at lessons learned at any major events we've had in California. How was the communication? What we could have had that would help us respond better. And so by looking at after action reports that you have done in your areas, but we will be asking quite a lot of all the associations and all the members to help us develop what it is, help us help you develop what it is that you need.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. If there's no more questions or comments, we will go to the next agenda item, which is new business and FCC's annual information collection, and that's Charles Burdan.
I had asked this to be put on the agenda. I had read the report, the FCC report to Congress on the state collection and distribution of 911 and enhanced 911 fees and charges, and I noticed that in this report that for the California piece of it, it did not report completely, I felt completely the fact that we do have some 911 funding that doesn't go towards 911. So I had asked Bill if he could report back on that, on how that was reported back to the FCC. And
first, does everyone know what the report we're talking about as far as board members? Because this was not part of the handouts. So is everybody familiar? I see a few people nodding, not everyone nodding. What I think we should do is, Bill, go ahead and provide the comments, but what we'll do is we'll get the report out to all the board members so everybody has the same understanding what the response is about.
Yeah, the Net 911 Act came about in 2008 as part of the New Emergency Technologies Improvement Act. And the basic concept is to look at what states and how they how they receive funds for 911, how they use the funds, and then report back to the federal government every year. We've been providing reports to the government since 2009, and in that they ask a series of questions. How we collect funds, what's our administrative authority to distribute funds, what we use the funds for, and we comment on that. And Charles is right. And when you look at the Act, over the past few years, we initially were describing the exceptions that funds were being spent on. In particular, of course, is the CDF. There's also funds spent for the Board of Equalization, the State Controller, and those are reported. That is assimilated and put into a report that is produced the following fiscal year. And it's interesting because in some years, the FCC reported that we were using the funds for, as we described them, or put forward for the CDF CAD program. The following fiscal year, they did not report it that way. They said we were using funds appropriately within their report. In 2011, the terminology was changed where we did not call out the CDF specifically. And we actually said we were using the funds as appropriate. So why that terminology was changed, I can't tell you at that point in time. The one thing it does point out in the Act is there's not a requirement that you don't use, or you can use the funds to support other entities besides 911. So they can define programs they can use funds for, but the Act does request that we do call those fund, or those call the variations out within our report to them. So in response to your question, that is something we need to take a look at and look at how the language is crafted when we send it back to the FCC this year.
And I would have a suggestion, and we can add this to the agenda for the next meeting, is let us go back and talk to the FCC and make sure we have a clear understanding of what they expect, get the report out to all the members so all the members have the same amount of information, and then we can revisit this at the next meeting. Would that be helpful?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I just want to make sure everybody has it. Okay. We're almost at the end of the agenda. Are there any agenda items for future meetings?
I think FirstNet could be included, even if it's just a brief synopsis of what the state's doing. I know the planning process is the next year or two for FirstNet, and interaction with the national planning group. So I think it'd be advantageous, since there is a nexus between FirstNet and 911.
Is this on? Thank you. I think it should be there as well. I think there's going to be a lot of progress made in the next year. And since we meet quarterly, I think it's going to be important for everybody to be tracking where we're going as California and also nationally. So I agree. We'll add that as a standing agenda item. Any other agenda items? Okay. Uh-huh.
Thank you. Just as a thought, and it doesn't have to be decided here, but I think quite a few of the organizations that are represented here have representatives to FirstNet. And just as a consideration as we get the updates to those, maybe to rotate, to request the representatives from those associations to come and as they provide input as to what is going on from their perspective as what's going on with FirstNet and what involvement they're having at that level. I know that you've got a very large overseeing portion, but I know that fire chiefs, police chiefs, sheriffs all have representatives to that. And so to get a little bit more in-depth understanding of how the outreach is working and to hear it back, I think would be beneficial.
I think that's a really good idea, because ultimately we need to make sure that we're being effective. Okay. Any other agenda items? Announcements? No announcements? Are there any public comments? Please come on up. If you could state your name and your organization.
Desi Calzada, California State University, East Bay. I just wanted to thank you guys for all the hard work you're doing, Mr. Anderson, the 911 office. I would also, on behalf of a university, really like to emphasize that text to 911, especially for us dealing with college-age youth, is we believe it's a critical, essential piece of equipment that we need to protect the students of our, and the employees of our universities. I do believe, though, that it's going to be important for the state to really be forceful and mandate the text to 911. We saw with cellular wireless 911s that when neighboring agencies don't take calls, that it could cause an undue hardship to the neighboring agencies that do take calls. And when it comes to text to 911, not having the ability to transfer a 911 text to an appropriate agency. For a university like Cal State East Bay, surrounded by a city, we have the potential of having these 911 texts that we can't offload to somebody else. And I think making sure that I encourage you to take a real strong approach to, if we're going to roll out this technology, then it needs to be rolled out regionally at least. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other public comments?
I'd like to respond to you just for a second. I appreciate your input, and as a reciprocal request, since you're requesting of us, I have a list here in front of me of Cal State Poly, CSU Fresno, CSU Northridge, and CSU San Jose, who are still not submitted letters to the agency for deployment of wireless 911 on their campuses. So to what degree you could have some influence in encouraging them to participate. We got to get to this before we get to your request.
Absolutely. And I will tell you though, Mr. Spiegel, I just started on May 5th with Cal State East Bay, and prior to that, I was with the city of Hayward that surrounds Cal State East Bay. And I will tell you that I worked with the local agency to purposely take all the 911 calls, wireless calls, and I did not want to overwhelm the CSU with wireless 911s. That being said, me as the primary PSAP at Hayward, I would take the 911s and then transfer to the university as a secondary transfer. I actually discouraged Cal State East Bay from being the primary PSAP for wireless 911s in my local area. Although they did submit a letter, I encouraged them to allow Hayward to take all the calls just to prevent their smaller dispatch center from becoming overwhelmed. But you know what? Starting in May, I agreed to work with those agencies, and if they haven't, and if there's some capacity to do that, I commit to doing that and making sure that we get them on board.
There is a broader scope to it that we look at overriding. If you're going to have a 911 center, if you're going to take calls, and particularly if we're going to spread our scarce Setna funding to have these additional PSAPs on all of these campuses, it's an all or nothing.
Over the next couple months, I'm going to reach out to those partners, my new partners in this Cal State system, and I'll see what I can do.
We appreciate your advocacy. Thank you.
Thank you. Were there any other public comments? Okay, with that, the meeting is adjourned. So thank you, everyone.